All right, well, I am seeing 10:01, so we will get started. Again, welcome everybody to today's webinar, Deeper Insights webinar series. Of course, these webinars come to you live every 2 weeks through Tech Canada. And if you don't have an opportunity to join us today live, these webinars are also recorded and sent out not only through our social media channels, but you can catch them on our website at techcanada.com, as well as through some of our e-communication channels. I'm thrilled to be joined today by DrCarol AnnBrown. Of course, the topic that we're looking at today is the greening of the economy. While the shift has been growing for decades, we've seen many public and private sector actors recently champion reform to create a more sustainable and equitable economy. Some analysts, as we've heard and seen in a lot of papers, predict that the global market for green innovation could reach $5 trillion or more by 2025. Ultimately, by identifying and capturing these opportunities that lie within this growth, businesses can improve their environmental and social performance and ultimately their bottom line at the same time. Joining us today to really dig deeper into this topic is Carol AnnBrown. She's president of the Delphi Group, and she ensures that the Delphi Group is executing on its mission to achieve a more sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future within a generation by aligning its executives and services with evolving client needs and offering top-of-the-line climate, sustainability, and ESG solutions. Carol Ann brings over 20 years of experience in clean innovation. I'm sure she's going to add a little bit more about that. Her international and multidisciplinary experience focuses on the environment, energy nexus, encompassing a broad range of issues, including emission trading, policy analysis, and formulation program development, as well as clean technology assessment and commercialization. Welcome, Carol AnnBrown. Thank you again for joining us today. And to anyone joining us live, we will have question periods throughout today's webinar. It will be interactive. Please submit them. We'll be sure to capture as many as possible. And if we don't get around to them, we'll certainly get to them either at the end or right after. Thank you, Carol AnnBrown, and welcome again. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Katrina, and thanks to everyone for joining. I also want to thank Tech for inviting us to participate. I'm going to share my screen so that I can speak to the content that hopefully is going to be valuable to you in your business. Let me begin. So Delphi is a boutique consulting firm. Like many of us in tech, we're a small business, and we've been specializing in climate change, sustainability, and ESG for over 30 years. We are based across Canada. We have offices in several provinces, and we work across the Canadian economy. And it's not just 30 years of expertise and experience. It's also, we walk the talk. It's really important to us. We care about the work we do and the outcomes that we achieve with our clients and our partners. Delphi is a consulting business, but we are part of a collection of organizations which together have the same vision of a sustainable, prosperous, and socially just future in a generation. And so we have a convening company called Globe Series. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's also been around for 30 years, and we took over running those events about 8 years ago. And we have two not-for-profit organizations. So one of them is the Canadian Business for Social Responsibility, and it is really a venue for thought leadership and peer-to-peer learning on sustainability in Canada, and has a number of organizations from different sectors that participate and together work through how are they going to elevate and execute on their sustainability plans. And then we have a youth engagement not-for-profit as well called Leading Change. And this is all about youth leadership in sustainability. over 30 years. Obviously, we've had hundreds and thousands of clients. This gives you a sense of the different sectors we work in and the size of the companies that we work with, as well as government agencies. We do have American clients, and although we don't have a physical presence in the US, and we do a bit of work in the EU as well. When we talk about it's part of our values, it's personally important to us. As a company, we also walk the talk. So we're a certified benefits corporation. We donate 1% of gross revenue to charity. We offset our electricity emissions with Bullfrog Power, so they source renewable power. We support our employees with their personal attempts to increase their sustainability. So we have what we call an eco fund. People have been given grants to help them invest in things like an electric vehicle, solar panels. They're not massive investments, but they're things that we can do to help make our employees more sustainable. And we pay attention to the social side of sustainability as well in terms of supporting our employees. Before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge that I have the privilege of working in and playing in the land of the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. And so that is the nations of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, and the Métis Nations of Region 3. And we like to start any kind of public engagement by acknowledging this is the land that we work on, and we encourage our clients and our partners to do the same. And this is a great resource to go take a look at where you land in North America in terms of First Nations. So the green economy. So what does it mean? So what I'd like to do is take you through some concepts that you've probably been hearing a lot about, seeing in the news, wondering what they mean, before getting into some examples and what this might mean for you. I'm going to start by getting you to flex your interactivity muscles and start with a poll so that you can give me a sense of where you're at with this terminology. So, you know, how familiar are you? Not at all, or I'm hearing a lot about it, or we're needing to, you know, pay for things that are aligned with green economy objectives, or we're already selling green products or services. And so I see people are bringing in some answers. Okay, so it's most people have probably heard about it, looking to understand more. Some people are seeing it hit their bottom line, either as a cost or even potentially something that you sell. And I think we have a few more to go. We have over 70% of participants who've answered. All right, nearly there, over 90%. But what I'm seeing is that most people are hearing about it and want to understand more, which Tech heard you. They brought you a session to help you on that. And some of you are already, it's already hitting your bottom line. That's great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, so then I'll move on to trying to explain a bit more about then what is the green economy. So essentially, a green economy is defined as low carbon, resource efficient, and socially inclusive. So this is a United Nations Environment Program broad definition. What does that mean? And so if you think about environmental and social and economic components, it means we're trying to, reduce our environmental impact through things like, okay, let's throw out less. Let's see what we can recycle more. How do we even start designing things so there's less waste at the end? How are we getting more efficient with our inputs into our business, into our houses, into our communities? What do we do with the carbon that we're emitting? Is there a way to emit less? Is there a way to store what we're emitting? There is a whole social side in terms of workers' rights, the well-being of employees, the well-being of society, et cetera, et cetera. Really critically, it's also about the economy in terms of jobs and skills and competitiveness and economic opportunity. And that's where I want to get to today, is to hone in on, this is about opportunity, and it's about moving away from the idea of environment against economy, environmental protection being a cost, and more about aligning opportunity with environmental services and products with economic development. So terminology, is there a difference between a green economy and sustainability? And so, yes, sustainability remains the vital long-term global goal. But green economy is describing the pathway to how we get there. What are we doing? What's different today, tomorrow than it was yesterday, 10 years ago, that gets us to have a more sustainable society for everyone? So it's really about putting that focus on the economy, on flows of investment, capital and infrastructure, on employment, on skills, that allows us to have positive social and environmental outcomes. So I'm going to throw some more terminology at you. Okay, sustainability, that's the end goal. How do we all live prosperous, purposeful lives? And ESG. So you've seen a lot of things in the media talking about ESG. What does that actually mean? So again, I'm going to go through some words that you've probably heard as well. And these are all, they're all within the same wheelhouse, I would say, and they've all come from a different place. They mean something slightly different. So I'm not going to define all of them, but I am going to give you a sense of where they come from, right? So 1987, the Brundtland Report on Sustainable Development, which really was defined as meeting the needs of today's society without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So how are we living within our means? What are we doing to make sure that future generations can be prosperous and have access to the same kind of lives that we get to enjoy? What do we have to do to get there? Triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, same ideas. It's not just about companies thinking about what is my end of day revenue and profit. It's also, how do I have positive profit, but also my employees, my customers, my stakeholders involved in helping me get that, because they're in a good place too. And how do I have a less of an impact on the planet in a way that allows me to continue to be prosperous and to have people continue to be healthy as well. Corporate responsibility and social responsibility, corporate citizenship. This really, came up in the 80s and 90s around how am I supposed to act within society? What are my responsibilities that allows me to be a company that people want to engage with and do right by my employees as well. SDGs. This stands for Sustainable Development Goals. And in 2015, after many years of lots of consultations, the United Nations came out with 17 Sustainable Development Goals that had to do with how do we on the planet ensure everyone has an equitable, prosperous existence. And so the 17, the icons are on this slide, and they have to do with, basic things like education, poverty, access to clean water. But they also have to do with, secure access to foods, mobility, resource use, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And they're used as a framework for organizations to think about, in what I do, how do I contribute to these things? So not everyone is necessarily going to say, well, what I do contributes to all 17 of the SDGs. They really more about, what is my particular purpose of my organization, and how does it tie to these where I can see we're going to have a positive impact. So they're often used as frameworks when people talk about their sustainability goals. So defining sustainability. It refers to the integration of environmental health, social equity, and economic vitality to create thriving, healthy, diverse, and resilient communities. And the graphic really shows the overlap between the three. It's really an integration, and it's a continuous journey to work towards this end state, to achieving sustainability. All right, ESG. So often people are interchanging the two. Sustainability, ESG, don't they mean the same thing? They're absolutely 100% related. ESG refers to the environmental, social, and economic non-financial factors and measures that represent material risk and growth opportunities for organizations. And they are increasingly being linked to assess the future financial performance of a company. So what's happening is that investors, shareholders, stakeholders, society is saying, okay, wait a minute. How is it what you do as a company, how are you showing up in these areas of performance in a way that we can track and see if you're improving? Because if you're improving on those things, you're potentially an organization we want to work with more over another organization that's not improving those areas. So, not everyone is going to be working on or reporting on all of these categories, but a lot of these are normal. Most of us are thinking about pay and promotion equity. All of us have to think about, sort of cyber risks in our systems. We don't all have boards. Some of us do. We have energy inputs, most of us. So ESG means the things that are material to the financial performance that people want to have clarity on to understand, are you a good company to work with? Are you getting better on these areas that are material to the financial performance of your organization? That's what ESG means. Okay, I'm gonna ask you another question, and then we'll see if you guys have questions for me on all of that content before I go on. So, how relevant is ESG to your business? Again, for some, maybe it's not something you're familiar with. For others, I think it's been in the mainstream media, and so maybe you've heard about it. Maybe you're trying to figure out if you're going to report on it or not. Some are already disclosing ESG metrics, and I'll touch on this in a little bit. There are financial institutions that have things like loans and some other vehicles where they link repayment and other and other parts of the investment setup to ESG performance. So I think BMO was one of the first in Canada to come out with a sustainability linked loan. If you did better on your metrics, your payback on interest would be lower than the original amount. So this is starting to show up. So yeah, so for those who, not that familiar with ESG, I hope this has been a bit helpful. For those of you who, want to understand more, this is a very high level explanation. Happy to chat offline. This is what we do. We help people understand this. And you'll see more and more are going to be thinking about reporting, even if they're not publicly traded organizations, because your customers and your employees and your shareholders might be looking for you to do so. Great. Thank you. This is super helpful to get a picture of where you're at. So Katrinella, I thought that's a lot of content. Maybe this is a good place to just see if there's a couple of questions before I jump into some more detail.
No questions at the moment, a lot of comments. Of course, we've got people joining us both live on our social media channels and here on Zoom. So some great engagement, a lot of individuals that have joined us today, but no specific questions at the moment.
Perfect. Yep. Understood.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So next level. All right. Now I've explained a little bit about what we're talking about, sustainability, ESG. Why? Why is it important? Why should we care? Why do I care? Why should you care? Because increasingly it's becoming a driver for business. It's shifting the way business is conducted. And if you haven't experienced that yet, you probably will. I mean, from a variety of areas, this is hitting all kinds of businesses across Canada and globally. So politically, Canada is committed to reaching net zero. It's got interim targets on the way to 2050, and it's regulating. It's got a carbon tax at pumps. It's working with provinces on how they're going to achieve their contribution through their industries. We're seeing it in mainstream media, how there's been a lot of activity in people saying we want better equity, we want fairness. We're seeing it show up absolutely in terms of our own experience with our natural environment, the flooding, the droughts, the extreme weather events. Climate change is starting to have an impact in a real way. And there are both risks for businesses, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And that's where I want to bring you to is start having you think about where can this be important for you in ways that it brings you new business, new opportunities, better talent retention, so that it's a positive and we let go of the narrative of this is just a risk and a cost. So some information for you around how this is viewed. So every year, the World Economic Forum surveys hundreds, if not thousands, of business leaders around the world. And in recent years, the top risks have to do with the environment, and particularly around climate change. And it's not just about the likelihood, are these likely going to be risks in terms of the extreme weather incidents, the loss of biodiversity, but how are they impacting us? And obviously in the last few years, infectious diseases, we've lived through a global pandemic. We are all familiar with what that does. But the impact of the failure to act on climate change and the failure to address other environmental priorities like biodiversity is impacting business and is going to continue to impact business. So it's not just, a sustainability consulting group that sees the world this way. There are lots of global business leaders who are also seeing it this way. Importantly, the financial community are demanding more ESG focused practices. So what does this mean? So BlackRock, one of the world's largest asset managers, does a sustainable investing survey every year. And recently their 425 investors representing $25 trillion in assets under management they were asked, like, how important is this to you? Well, 88% ranked environment as the priority most in focus. 54% are considering sustainable investing to be fundamental. And 75% are currently or considering integrating ESG into their investment decisions. What does that mean? Like, that piece might seem a bit, confusing. How do they do that? Well, those ESG metrics I showed earlier, those are the categories, but then there's a whole bunch of data that can be brought forth to be able to rank where people are on disclosing, but also performing in those areas. So what are your greenhouse gas emissions? What are the type of those emissions? What are your plans to reduce those emissions? How well can you show that you're able to execute on those plans? What did you do last year? Where's the capital investment this year? This is the kind of screening that investors are putting in place in order to understand the risk and the benefit of investing in one type of sector or company versus another. And it's hitting the boardroom. 6-7 years ago, lots of companies that we knew, small companies, not the majors, but small companies, are saying, yeah, I think it's important, but my board doesn't see it important and my executive don't see it as important. So we're not really pushing hard for them to pay attention to this. And then a few years ago, because the financial community worldwide started to really put pressure on boards and in their financing practices to ask for this, it's been a major change. And these are some of the examples of the kinds of initiatives worldwide and then in Canada of the financial community really pushing for disclosure, visibility, and action on climate change. And they're increasing the cost of capital for high emitting sectors. So that's going to drive decarbonization from the top because the money is going to determine what's going to keep operating. Business case for sustainability. Why should you care, right? If it's not something that, if you're not publicly traded, if your investors, your shareholders, your stakeholders, not saying much, why does it matter? Well, last year when I joined tech, my chair shared with our group that 8,500 people a week in Canada were permanently leaving the workforce. Baby boomers are retiring. I don't know about you, but it's not easy to hold on to good people. And so it actually matters, and it matters to more than just younger generations who've grown up with this, unlike perhaps me or my parents did. So in terms of attracting and retaining talent, thinking about sustainability matters. It's also, there's some good work out there, notably Vaclav Smil, a professor in Manitoba, that show that every economic transaction has an energy input. So if we're reducing our energy inputs and we're reducing operational costs, often we're also reducing our emissions. And there's ways to innovate that bring a higher level of sustainability that is a good market opportunity. Brand, in terms of all of us have customers in one way or the other. How do we show up? What do they care about? Again, back to the financial institutions and what they're looking for and what they're starting to prioritize. Maintaining and improving market share. It's a way of doing that in terms of being clear about sustainability objectives and working towards them. And strategy. I'm going to give you some examples later on about businesses that are embracing green economic opportunities, what they look like. And that brings us a source of competitive advantage. So just recently, if you've been paying attention to what's happening in the US, Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act that came out late 2022, over $300 billion of investment available for green technologies. A couple of weeks ago, the EU came forth with their own plan because they want to keep companies and economic benefit in Europe as well. And so, here's Bloomberg calling it the clean tech arms race has begun, because it is going to be competition for that $5 trillion market for clean solutions. All right, I have some business examples. I will go back to Catrinelle at this point to just see, are there any clarifying questions on the big dump of information I've just shared?
You bet. There's a couple questions that have come through. One that you touched upon a little bit in one of your previous slides, but I'll ask it anyways. And the first one is, do you see ESG disclosure being a requirement for non-public companies? I know you addressed it briefly, but perhaps if you want to expand on that a little bit, that'd be great. And I'll wait and then ask the second question.
Yeah, that's a great it's a great question. So I think it's a possibility. I think that there are different mechanisms to get there. It's not very clear how. So right now, obviously, when you're publicly traded, you are under a set of obligations that are different from a private company. We know that we're a small private company. But we could get at requiring disclosure through simple things like our incorporation laws in Canada, right? There are mechanisms to build that in different places. But even before we do that for all organizations in Canada, it's important to ask ourselves the questions as a non-public company. Is it important to our staff? And is it important to our customers and to any of our other key stakeholders? If they care about what we're doing or not doing, then that is often good enough motivation.
Yeah, thank you. And again, your previous slide had kind of touched upon that, the brand, the current employee retention, important topic for all of us, and ultimately kind of down the road where they see themselves going. So thank you. I'll ask the second question. Where is the risk of being seen as greenwashing? And how do we know that our initiatives are truly meaningful and perhaps not just virtue signaling?
Yeah. That's a great question. So you might have seen in the news late last year a few things. RBC was heavily criticized for greenwashing because they were saying they're investing in things that were towards green objectives, and there was some criticism in some of the details of actually what they were doing. Was it very different from mainstream investing, or was it actually, additional to that? People are picking these things up. So it really is a matter of, can you demonstrate evidence of performance? So the things that I shared at the beginning in terms of us walking the talk, we still emit, like we still have facilities, our offices, we still fly, we offset those things, but is there more that we can do? So we don't claim that we're neutral. We just say, we're investing in things that offset our current emissions. It will matter to your staff and to your customers that you say things like, okay, we want to get here. We think it's going to take us a time to get there, and we'll tell you along the way how we're doing, rather than we're great, we're doing all the things. I'm not suggesting I've had a chance to interact with other tech members to the extent that this group cares about being good business leaders. So I think if you think about the real priorities and you take one first step and you look at what are the future steps, that will say a lot, because it's not like Rome was built in a day, right? We need to take the first step, and that's important that we're just starting.
Thank you. That was all the questions for now, and I'll certainly keep an eye out and bring up any that come along. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the where we started was about, there are opportunities for all industries. This means something to everyone, and it can mean something to everyone. So I have a specific example here. So Carlsberg Group late last year came out with a new carbon zero and beyond target. Okay, so this is achieving net zero carbon emissions across the entire value chain by 2040 from how the barley is grown in the field. So lower emitting inputs, more efficient optimization. What are the systems you can use, to the beer in your hand? So where's the glass come from? What are their manufacturing facilities like now? So from, soup to nuts, from the field to what we get to enjoy. And this is an evolution on some work that they'd started several years back to start reducing their emissions. So as a consumer, if you think, okay, it's the weekend, I'm going to have some friends over, I'm going to get some beer. Am I going to buy Carlsberg? Am I going to buy Molson? I don't buy either. I'm a microbrewery kind of person. But let's just say, as an example, for some people, that's going to make a difference. It's going to make a difference to the consumer, who they're buying from. It makes a difference to their costs, lower energy inputs, lower energy costs. And so there are regulatory drivers, but they're consumer drivers. So I'm going to touch on a few different industries next and give you some examples for you to think about, because I know that tech has all kinds of companies in it. And so you might not find yourself in these kinds of industries, but it might help you think about, what could I do? So, in the built environment, spaces we're in every day, when we work, when we play, when we go shopping, etc. There are all kinds of things that we can do to reduce our environmental impact and increase our sustainability. So green power options. Well, if you're not generating renewable power on your own, and we are blessed in Canada to have a lot of provinces that have a lot of renewable power, lots of hydro, increasing levels of wind and solar, etc. There are companies like Bullfrog Power that will purchase that for you with some, very strong evidence of being able to show that they've purchased that for you, so that that somewhere in Canada there is some green power being generated that I can attach to my commitment to reduce emissions. Existing providers of energy sources like Enbridge, they've added to their suite of their current business things like green natural gas. They are sourcing renewable natural gas from different types of facilities, mostly in Ontario. There's movement in Western provinces as well. For people who want to say, hey, I don't want to just have natural gas, fossil fuel source, is there a way to green that? Lots of energy efficient systems out there. Most of us have LED lights, high efficiency service furnaces in our homes, et cetera, but that's a huge area of business in Canada in terms of people retrofitting their homes or building new in a way that's more energy efficient. And then smart control system. So the explosion of tech in the last few decades is allowing for new options that have a sustainability outcome. It allows us to monitor things, to manage things, in order to have a lighter environmental footprint. And then new materials. How do we still build and have less of a footprint? So there's a Halifax-based company called Carbon Cure. They actually sequester carbon into cement. And so it's a smaller footprint in terms of new build. And of course, generating power on our own. And then there's heavier industry, manufacturing facilities, some resource extraction, oil and gas, where there are all kinds of larger environmental footprints, where there are alternatives to help decrease that environmental impact. So things like fuel switching, you probably heard of carbon capture, utilization, and storage. There's a Calgary company called Carbon Upcycling that's been developing a technology to take the carbon out of emissions and to use that carbon and create new products out of it. So they create graphene out of the carbon. They're creating coatings for certain types of pipes and facilities out of it. So it's a new business opportunity to take carbon that is a waste product and turn it into something that can be useful. There are a few companies around the world that are actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. So there's one in Canada called Carbon Engineering. There's another one in Europe called Climeworks, where it's not just about reducing the footprint that we have by reducing emissions, it's how do we actually take it out of the atmosphere as well. And then there's, you know, for things like we have large facilities that create heat in their processes. We are still working on waste heat recovery. How do we not lose that heat? How do we reintegrate it into processes, reduce our inputs, therefore reduce our costs, reduce our greenhouse gases? Great Ontario company called Condex. They have a waste heat recovery and reuse system that they use in different industries, and they're adapting it to new industries. So there are all kinds of ways to think about how do we have less of an environmental impact, and companies are creating new businesses in order to help clients achieve that. You'll have noticed that obviously we're talking a lot about the environmental side because a lot of the priority sustainability issues that we help clients on has to do with climate. It has to do with carbon. It is one of the biggest pain points we see, not just in Canada, but globally. That's not to say that there aren't other sustainability priorities. There are many, and they're worth trying to work on. This just happens to be usually the big one that we tend to work with people on. Transportation, how do we get around? Electric vehicles, lots of rebates in different provinces across Canada, but it's not just for our passenger vehicles. We're looking at rail, marine as well. And we got to charge vehicles somewhere. So there's a great Canadian company called ChargePoint that is working on doing that in order for us to create the infrastructure that just makes it a no-brainer. We can get around however we need to. We're still using biofuels. Another Canadian company, Greenfield Global, it's got operations in Canada, the US, Ireland. It produces chemicals as well as fuels. And so there are different ways in different sectors in order to take a core competency and build a business around it. As I talked about before, the explosion in digital tech, IT tech, is allowing for new ways of doing things that has a sustainability benefit. So Uber, the sharing economy, how do more people have access to getting around in a way that they don't have to buy a car and find parking and all that kind of stuff? Uber allows for a different way for people to think of mobility and use mobility. It also has a sustainability benefit. And then there's other fuel opportunities as well. Everyone in Canada has probably heard of Ballard at some point. Hydrogen is very, very, very in fashion right now. We already use it in Canada. We already produce it. It's about, can we make it in a way that's got fewer emissions as well? So we're a professional services firm. And I wanted to touch briefly on, okay, if I don't have large emissions from manufacturing something or processing something, and we don't have big fleets, we're really just our offices and our people, what can we do? Well, again, back to our employees, there are things that we can do that has a productivity and operational benefits that also contribute to more sustainability. So lots of us work from home or have hybrid setups. Where can we, optimize office utilization, smaller footprints, more efficient offices, as well as, are we offsetting our travel emissions? Are we allowing people to work from home or carpool or give them transit passes? Things that we can do every day that have a sustainability benefit. And again, the technology allows us to continue to be productive, happy employees, but still interacting in collaborative ways that make everyday work interesting. Lowering our energy and material costs in our facilities Companies like Brainbox AI look at how do we create spaces that have lower emissions, that use optimization technologies. And again, how do we work with our employees and our customers on what's important to them, and therefore actions, small stepwise actions that we can take to have a better sustainability performance. So we buy renewable power from Bullfrog Power, but they also offer a service of offsets as well. Okay, I know I've been going a mile a minute on examples, and so I wanted to go back to open up the floor to questions. I'd be happy to answer some here or catch an L. I know that there's always more questions after the fact when I go to a webinar, so I'd be happy to chat with folks afterwards too.
You bet. The only one that came through, and more of a question, but perhaps something that you can expand upon, is the idea of a green natural gas, and how ultimately does a company, how do you expand on that? What does that really look like? And how can you have both in one sentence?
Yeah.
In one approach and one initiative?
Yeah, for sure. I can start with just the science of it and the sources of it, and then, why and what does that look like? So methane, naturally forming as a fossil fuel, but also produced through things like anaerobic digestion, which can use different source materials. So biogas in agricultural spaces, as well as forest biomass, as well as even wastewater and landfill. And why would people even care, right? Why would you want to do that? Well, I touched on earlier, some of the drivers for sustainability, where governments are coming in and saying, we're going to regulate this, we're going to mandate this. So BC actually has a goal for how much renewable natural gas is sold. And the main gas utility, FortisBC, is part of implementing that. And so they are sourcing renewable natural gas from different customers. So the corporations are responding to government mandates, but they're also responding to the private sector. So Enbridge has a renewable natural gas, offering where they're sourcing from different places. Some it's biogas in Ontario, and it's because there's a customer demand for it. So, and the neat thing to think about in terms of your own businesses is that Enbridge knows pipelines, it knows gas, it knows distribution. So the gas is not so dissimilar. If it comes from biogas, they've got to find a source. They got to pay for that gas. There's a little bit of cleaning up if it comes directly from an anaerobic digester. But then it's just a parallel to their mainstream business of fossil fuel natural gas, where they got to get through a pipeline. They got to make sure it's safe. They got to have a compressor station. They got to get it to distribution network. And then they got to get it to their customers. And so the beauty of things like that is, what are you doing in your mainstream business where there's an additional offering that is more sustainable, lower impact, that doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel. You can be doing something similar to what you're already doing, and it's a step sideways that provides another revenue stream. Some companies think up completely different things and go in different ways as well, and they can be successful doing that. But often it starts with, how do I do what I'm doing now, but do it in a slightly different way or in a very different way, and deliver a sustainability product or service.
Thank you. Another question is more around the process to change from where companies are now to moving into that greener, more ESG sustainable environment. Any perhaps parting words of what you've seen that look like for companies? And I know it's a big topic and we've got 4 or 5 minutes left, but I can only imagine it's not as straightforward, it's not as simple, and companies might be thinking, well, what's my investment and when will I see a return in this transition? Which is important, but what would that look like, especially for some companies that may not have that wiggle room, but want to be able to move in this direction?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we often see organizations needing to start with, oh, where am I at right now? Like, am I emitting anything? Well, if you're using energy in Canada, there's a likelihood that you're emitting something. So, get a sense of what are your current costs in terms of emissions or, use of water, etc. And then it really becomes part of your values. So this is where we start with clients and partners and others. Is what is important to you? What do you want to leave as a legacy? What's important to your staff? Do they really care about more about, we're not really good about diversity, and we think we're missing the boat in terms of new opportunities because we don't have a diversity of people on our team, and then therefore diversity of thought. Start with where the values of the organization, where you want to go, and then start working backwards with people to ask them, what's important to you? And are we missing anything? And sometimes that's just, you know what? I think we need to think about just our facilities need to be more sustainable. So let's figure out our emissions. Let's figure out our environmental footprint. And can we reduce that a little bit? Usually starting at one step, the building from there will go on and on. We like to help our clients focus on kind of like, what's the 3 things you're going to do this year? You're going to calculate your impact. You're going to think about how to become more diverse, and we're going to share that with our team, right? Then if you're not publicly traded, what do we want to say externally? We'll build on that next year. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work that can go into those planning, but it's really about who do you want to be as a company?
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. I see we've got about 3 minutes. I don't have any questions that have come in either through our social channels or here on Zoom. So I don't know if there's any parting words you want to leave us with. Obviously, what you shared about where to start, starting small, aligning it with values, I think is really important, and tying it back to the company and recognizing that perhaps unlike what the UN wants to do with 17, perhaps might not be sustainable for a company to start with. That seems like a lot to take on. And of course, the scale that they're looking to take it on is much, much different than what a company would do.
Yeah, it is. And, I don't know what sectors you're in or who your competitors are or who your peers are. Talk to others. I mean, that's sort of the basis of tech as well, is that together we get better because we work together, we share where we're at. Talk to others. What are you doing? Did your employees talk to you about this, or your customers talking about this? Oh, how did you respond? Find out what others are doing to help you calibrate. Oh, okay, maybe I need to think about that.
Yeah, thank you. If questions come through afterwards, of course, please don't hesitate to send it to us at Tech Canada, either through some of our social channels. Of course, this recording will be posted afterwards. So Carol Ann, I hope that you're all right with perhaps us sending some questions to you after the fact if they do
Sure.
Come in. And if anyone is looking to get in touch with you or the Delphi group, how can they reach out? How can they be connected?
Absolutely. So we'd be happy to have a chat. I've gotten a lot out of tech, and so I'm happy to give back. My email is here. I don't have all the answers. I have some very smart people on my team who've got better answers than I do. But if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out, and we'll come back to you and try to help you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you for all of your insights today. Thank you for answering the questions. And thank you, of course, to everyone that participated in the surveys, asked questions, posted them online, and ultimately joined us today. I certainly found it very insightful and took a lot away about, again, starting small, connecting it to the values, and talking to others, whether it be employees and understanding what your staff want or what others in the industry or other industries are doing. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And again, thank you to everyone who joined. Have a wonderful rest of the day.